Hi, this is Dave Ekstrom from the Hayward High School Science Department, and I'm here to talk to you for a few minutes about standards-based grading. To answer the question, what is standards-based grading, I should probably first start out by saying that standards-based grading is more of a philosophy than it is a particular method. Different standards-based grading practitioners have slightly different strategies that they use to carry out standards-based grading, but they're all guided by a few basic philosophical underpinnings. In answering this question, I'm going to attempt to give you the three things that we think are the most important features of standards-based grading. In the process, I hope you come to understand why we think standards-based grading is the best type of grading available and why we've chosen to use it here in the science department. One feature that's important in standards-based grading is that it reports student proficiency. We have certain learning targets for each of our classes here in the science department, outcomes that we want students to have mastered, different skills or concepts by the time they get to the end of the class in order to be successful. This is probably true in most classes, but what goes in the gradebook in traditional grading is not direct pointed evidence about how the student has mastered the various learning targets. Instead, what goes in the gradebook is events, things like homework, projects, lab reports, tests, essays, quizzes. Those are the kinds of things that end up in the gradebook. Well, often these learning activities are A, practice, and B, a mishmash of a bunch of different learning targets put together into one project or assignment. So we don't think that's the most efficient way to let the stakeholders, students, parents, administrators, and even the teacher know which skills or concepts an individual student has mastered. Instead, we would like to see a checklist of proficiency on the learning targets. Have you mastered learning target A, learning target B, learning target C? So that's what we do in our gradebooks. Now, it's not just mastery versus non-mastery. We have various levels of proficiency that we report, and that all turns into a letter grade. Details of how this happens will be in the syllabus for your individual classes. But in the gradebook, we do not put events. Instead, what we put is levels of mastery for the learning targets. We're reporting outcomes. Another important feature of standards-based grading is that there's a focus on knowledge. When we shifted to standards-based grading, we also noticed a shift in the way students looked at work. In traditional grading, a grade is almost like a paycheck. The teacher is like your boss. They assign you various tasks to do. You do those tasks, and as a reward for doing the tasks, you are given a grade, kind of like a paycheck at your job. When we shifted to standards-based grading, we saw a shift in student focus. Students were no longer focused on maximizing points in the most efficient way because there are no points in standards-based grading. Instead, students came to understand that the only way to get a higher grade was to learn more or to learn better the things that they already were beginning to understand. We like that, and so we continued to shift away from the paycheck model and more towards what we now think of as a resume model. Instead of getting a paycheck for doing tasks, you now have a resume that's a checklist of skills you have mastered that you can take to your next classes or to your next steps in life. Another thing that we think is important about standards-based grading is that it reports current proficiency. Let me try to explain what I mean by using an example. This person here you may or may not recognize. It's Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt is one of the fastest human beings who ever lived. He set a lot of world records, and then he broke his own world records. His ability to set those world records were the results of lots of activities that he did, lots of practice, lots of growth throughout his life and career. But imagine us taking all of his running times for all the races that he did, even when he was a little toddler or a high schooler, as well as his current world records, and added them all up and found an average. We would have a very different picture of Usain Bolt as a runner. We don't think that makes very much sense. Definitely doing the work is very important. Definitely the learning activities that we ask students to do are going to contribute to positive outcomes. But what we really want to know is, what happened at the end? What did that student eventually grow to become? Here's another example that might also drive home why we think this is important. These are the records of two hypothetical cadets learning how to pack parachutes. We have two cadets. Cadet A, in the blue line here, has about an 85 to 90% proficiency on packing parachutes. That means most of the people, like 90% of the people whose parachutes he packed, would probably have survived. By the end of day 10, Cadet A is still about at the same level. Pretty good at packing parachutes. Cadet B was horrible on day 1. Over 75% of the people who used his parachutes would have died. But by day 7, Cadet B's understanding had grown to the point where he was packing parachutes 100% successfully and consistently all the time. Now, who would you rather have packing your parachute on day 11? I know who I would choose. But you wouldn't be able to make that determination if you had only averages to go on. Cadet B's average was 72%, considerably lower than Cadet A. But clearly, by the time the course was over, by the time the training was done, Cadet B was the more proficient parachute packer. And we feel like current proficiency tells the story much better than averaging a large number of events or even assessments over the course of a grading period. Hopefully this answers questions that you may have about standards-based grading. I'm sure you will have more. Make sure that you refer to your syllabus, and also don't hesitate to contact your teacher to get some more details about how it works.